Okay, welcome to Left Behind Natives, the podcast that gives voice to the Native people often left out of the mainstream conversation. I'm your host, Charlie Maasaw, and today I'm speaking with someone who their work is not only preserved sacred sites, but also reclaims it physically, spiritually, and culturally. Our guest is Maasaw Howard, author of and I know I'm going to get this wrong, Maasaw, as I told you off screen, my Cherokee is very rusty, but it's Adonvdo Yona Mountain, which is, of course, Bear Spirit Mountain. And then you reminded me that it also, in the title, has Ancestral Awakening, Ancient Ancestral Awakening, which is really important stuff. I've read that so much throughout the book. It's very amazing, to say the least. He's also written another book called As I Rest, Let My Face Touch Heaven, which is right here, which I'm looking forward to after I finish the Adonvdo Yona Mountain, which is very important to me. So these are some great writings. In these writings and his life, he has walked with the ancestors, protecting ceremonial sites that hold ancient, powerful truths buried deep in the Appalachian Mountains. And I would like to tell you a little bit about him, because sometimes we don't always speak a lot about ourselves, but to be honest with you, he is a Native author, a spiritual caretaker and cultural preservationist based in West Virginia. These books that I have mentioned chronicle his journey of reclaiming sacred indigenous lands and connecting with his ancestral lineage through ancient ceremonial sites. He is a steward of Bear Spirit Mountain, one of the most significant and least acknowledged spiritual landscapes in the eastern United States, and he's a powerful voice for the movement to protect them. So, in any case, if you could, Maasaw, please let us know a little bit about yourself.
First off, a sincere thank you for inviting me on your show. I'm deeply honored to be here speaking with you. I'm basically a very unique story. A lot of your guests will have come from a background where they grew up in the culture or on a reservation. I am not that person. I was a person that, at a very young age, my father, who's from Southeast Kentucky, proudly told us that I had Cherokee lineage. And of course, in the 70s, I went to school and I told my schoolmates that, and was summarily chastised and scolded and basically called a lot of dirty names. And that left a very powerful imprint on my mind that I should just shut my mouth and not say anything at all. This is not something I'm proud of, but it's something that I was dealing with at that time in my very young and formative years. I went through the majority of my life not even acknowledging my Native American heritage. I have very deep royal heritage on the British side, being the last name Howard. Obviously, you think of Catherine Howard, wife of Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn, whose mother was a Howard, and so on and so on. The Howards played such a prominent part in England's history. And I've made several pilgrimages to England to visit our family castles. Even today, the name Howard, the Duke of Norfolk currently, is still a Howard. So I was very interested in learning about that side of my family. And I'm still interested in that because I'm proud of all my heritage. It doesn't matter where it began, it's what made me I am today. And it was about 9 years ago that a series of events happened that I like to say, if you remember as a child when your grandmother grabbed you by the ear and pulled you and said, "You're coming with me." Well, that's what our indigenous ancestors did. And it was through a series of events that It's what my first book is based on. It is the ancestral awakening. And these events transpired at what you mentioned, a place called Bear Spirit Mountain. And at the time, my wife and I were looking to buy some land. We wanted to build a home that we could make our retirement at, away from the growing area that I live in today. So as we visited this land with our real estate agent, we drove around this small curve. And as we went about 50 yards down the road, on the left-hand side, both my real estate agent, who was a lifelong friend as well, both he and I looked on the left side of the road and we saw a large black bear. And this large black bear was simply lying down on its stomach. And it was a hot July day. But we were only about 25 yards away from this black bear. And typically, growing up in these Appalachian mountains, bears either run or they fight. Very rarely do they just sit there and let you gawk at them. But this bear was just intently staring at us. And I immediately got the impression that he was looking at us saying, "Where have you been?" That was the impression I got. And so my wife and my friend, we start taking photos and doing the paparazzi thing. And we're very fascinated by this bear's behavior, because growing up a hunter, I'm used to seeing them run from me.
Right.
But this bear had no fear at all, and just laid down and was just staring at us. So after a few minutes passed, Charlie, I said to my wife and my friend, "I don't want to stress this bear. Let's continue down the road," because the road actually made up part of the boundary of the property. "Let's continue down the road. Let's look at the rest of the property. And when we return, I imagine this bear will be gone." So that's what we did. We drove slowly by the bear so as not to stress it. And we went to the end of the property. We took about 15 minutes, and then we came back. And now this would make the bear on the right side of the road from the vehicle. And sure enough, the bear was still there. After a 15+ minute hiatus, he did not leave. So we're staring at the bear, except the only change is the bear is now standing up. He's on all fours, and he's parallel to our vehicle again, about 25 yards away, not far at all.
Right.
Again, showing no fear, showing no emotion at all. At this point, the bear starts to walk paralleling our vehicle. So I slowly follow the bear as he's following his path. And then the bear stops at a rock wall, a man-made stacked rock wall. And he stares at this rock wall. And then occasionally he would look over his left shoulder at us. And then he would look back at the wall. Then he would look at us, as if he's saying, "Look at the wall." So I said to my wife, "I don't understand this behavior. This is very, very strange behavior for an animal that is hunted and is dangerous." So this went on for a minute or two. And then the bear slowly walked to the right uphill, and we parted ways for the moment. Again, I was not connected with my indigenous heritage yet, but this is the beginning of the ancestral awakening. So
Right.
we came home that evening, and I told my wife, "I don't understand what just happened, but I think it's some sort of omen. We should buy this property." Now, what I failed to mention is also on this property were dozens of very strange-looking rock structures. There were giant boulders with dozens of small rocks stacked on top of them. There was other just rock piles, dozens of rock piles all over this property. So I'm thinking at the time, well, all of that's going to have to be bulldozed. So we buy the property. And the problem is now all of these rock structures are gnawing at me. What am I looking at? Why is this rock stacked this way, and so forth? Fortunately, the ancestors started connecting me with people in the indigenous community. Even though I wasn't aware, that's what they were doing. And they connected me with an archaeologist who specializes in Native American history, the man that the Smithsonian called with questions.
Yeah.
His name is Jack Renicki. And Jack was a career archaeologist. He wrote 51 books on Native American history.
I've read some of them.
Oh, wonderful.
Absolutely.
Sadly, Jack left us. He crossed over 3 years ago. But so Jack comes out to the property and we're walking the property together, and he's quiet. And I'm thinking, what is going on? He's not saying hardly anything to me. So after we walk a couple acres of this 30-acre tract, he turns to me and he says, "Young man, I don't think you understand what's going on here." I said, "Sir, I don't. What am I looking at?" He said, "You are standing in a Native American burial ground." And he said, "By the way, it's over 10,000 years old." And I looked at him and I said, "How could you possibly know that?" And he took me over to one of the boulders that had a petroglyph on it. He said, "Do you see that animal? It went extinct during the Younger Dryas event, 11,800 years ago."
Wow.
They were carving what they were seeing. And I said, "Am I looking at an elephant?" And he said, "Yes, that is a woolly mammoth that was carved into that rock." And I was, from that point on, that's when they grabbed me by the ear and said, "You're coming with us now."
Right. Knowing what I know about you right now, and forgive me for interrupting, I chuckled, and I don't want you to feel bad. I want to apologize for that. But I chuckled because I was already looking ahead, knowing who you are today, and thinking that you would bulldoze that area. I know it's just such a transition from one mindset to another mindset, and it's the same thing with the bear as well. You know, fortunately, you had been a hunter in your life, whereas some of our audience may not know the significance of how bears react. They know it's either fight or flight. There's no in between. And you know, I grew up around wild bears among other animals, and I know that when you recognize that he didn't move, that's when it really hit you. And I know that that's when this all really started. And like I say, you know, it's a beautiful thing. And once we get into the book a little bit, I want to tell you some of my observations about it that I think are significant. Not being there and not being in close proximity to you or what have you, but likewise, like I said, that the idea that, you know, the modern idea, I guess I should say, that you would have to bulldoze this stuff, and knowing that bear was there already to protect it and to show you the way, and knowing who you are today, which is a really wonderful person. Like I say, I know that the idea, it was significant. It really was significant in your life, the change that you went through from the bulldozer to being a steward and protecting these lands, which is so vital. You know, we don't have enough of that today. But anyway,
I later learned that as the ancestors were teaching me, and Jack was teaching me about what are these rock structures, the terminology, what is a base stone cairn, what is a platform structure, what are niche stones, what are split stones, all of these amazing ceremonial features that our ancestors made for their loved ones when they passed on, when they crossed over. I learned that in the Cherokee culture and traditions, that the bear is a messenger, and that the bear will be sent by the ancestors to determine, are you worthy of the sacred land? And that's exactly the behavior that bear exhibited that day.
That's
Staring
right.
at us, are you worthy of this special place?
That's right.
And I just feel, and I get a little emotional, but I just feel so honored that the ancestors chose me. I'm not college educated. I'm not an archaeologist. I'm not an academic. I'm just a simple man. And it's from that point that Jack showed me that petroglyph of that woolly mammoth that it took over my life. It became, other than taking care of my wife, it became the passion in my
Mm-hmm.
life, you know,
Sure.
and it's now led me to this wonderful conversation with you. As I learned what was on my land, I started noticing, oh, wait, my neighbors have some of this stuff too.
Yeah.
So I got permission, and what started out with a 30-acre tract turned into a 5-mile long archaeological site
Wow.
on 2 sides of a mountain, but also on 2 other mountains as well, and dates back over 15,000 years, according to the archaeologist Jack Rudnicki.
Sure.
And we don't have datable material, Charlie. We don't have charcoal or anything like that.
Sure.
But Jack is basing his estimated date on the animals that we see: the giant sloth, the camel, the horse, the American lion, the saber-toothed tiger. He's basing it on what we're seeing in the form of what our ancestors were carving and painting at that site.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had also mentioned in the book that you had seen this before, I believe, driving through Canada. You had seen those stones stacked up. Is that right?
Yeah, and a lot of times white people have copied our custom of stacking stones as navigation markers.
Sure.
Today, what we used as ceremonial rock features, we call them, to honor our deceased, our loved ones, are today used more in the terms of navigational features for hikers and bikers and campers.
Sure, sure, sure. I'll tell you something, since you said that, that's a little off topic, I guess, of our conversation today, but I would like to mention it, especially if you have access to see any of these petroglyphs. Something that is near and dear to my heart are all of the ancient mound sites. And this sounds very similar to what I've seen at many of the ancient mound sites. Now, I have been to mound sites from Ohio to Argentina, okay? And something that I noticed about 15 or not quite 20 years ago was here in my beautiful state of Alabama, which is where we have the most historic, like you can count them, mound sites of anywhere in the Americas. And I say that because when I was a kid, my mom always had a Rand McNally map, right? In his old map books. And in the early 80s, it actually had all of them listed, which is amazing because, of course, you know, organizations like the TVA, Army Corps of Engineers, they all know about this, as we had discussed off camera about one of my family's archaeological sites. But the thing that I noticed that I've paid specific attention to that has become, you know, important to me, when you say roadmap or you know, leading a path or lining the way, and once again, I know our topic there is more about how Europeans have kind of copied some of what we do, but I'd like to tell you that in Moundville, in Cahokia, and the Spiru Mounds, and the ones in Pinson, Tennessee, the ones that are close to me here in Kolomoki over in Georgia, all of those mound sites have one reoccurring symbol that is everywhere on that one site. And having spent so much time in Mexico, specifically at Teotihuacan, Mexico, which is above Mexico City, I've gotten to see a lot of the old petroglyphs from that time period, which, by the way, they did have the lions there in their petroglyphs too, which is kind of interesting. And a lot of laymen discredit Teotihuacan's age and what have you, but most people know better. But anyway, I've noticed a symbol, and I believe I think I have, this is the one from Teotihuacan. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
But it's right here.
Okay.
Now, I've got pictures of the ones from all the other sites, but that has always been a symbol. The one in Moundville, if you just Google Moundville, Alabama, one of the first things that you'll find is a picture of a plate, we call it. It's a stone plate, and it's got what a lot of people believe is a hand with an eye in the middle of it.
All right.
But it's not an eye. That is actually the design, that what they call an eye is the design for Moundville, which is a peninsula. And it's got the peninsula right there, and it shows you, which is just, it's amazing to me. And then the one over in Cahokia, is equally as significant. Like I said, they're always something small, and they're usually on pottery. And of course, when you get to a site that's predates pottery, sometimes it's hard to find that. But if you would, while you're out and about, take a look for that, because I have found it on every ancient site I have been to, which is very significant. It's not something that archaeologists share, or really, I think the ones that visit Moundville are still convinced that's a hand and an eye. But the eye by itself is on so much of their pottery. But anyway, one thing that you had mentioned, and I'm going to go back early in the conversation here, is about being ostracized for being Native. And I'd like to share a story with you. I hope that it's all right with my wife, because it's her story. But she's mentioned it a couple of times in public, so I guess it's okay for me to share. But it's one that a lot of us have experienced. When she was going to elementary school, one of her teachers said, "Who is Native American in this class?" They were talking about Native Americans. I guess the teacher was on some kind of a kick or an agenda or whatever, but she says, "Who is Native American in class?" My wife and a young girl from Mexico stood up. And my wife also has family from Mexico, but she stood up, and the young, and I may be missing some of the story, because once again it's me telling it, not my wife, but she'll never go on camera to tell it, so hopefully, like I said, this will be okay. But they stood up, and the teacher said, "No, you're not Native American, because there are no more Native Americans today, and we have nothing to be afraid of." That's what she said. Now, I've never clarified the age of this teacher, if she came from a time period that people had to be afraid of Native Americans or what have you. It's a good possibility. But that's something that hit home with me, because we've all experienced that in some way or shape or form. And oftentimes, as once again you and I have discussed privately, a lot of these notions that people have are perpetrated by other people. And if you look upstream, the sad part of it is it's usually Native people that are ostracizing their own. And sometimes if you look upstream just a little bit, it eventually gets back to somewhere in the government wanted them to do that, and eventually they turn XYZ Native politician, as you and I discussed off stage. But they discuss that idea with XYZ politician, who is an Indian, and oftentimes in leadership positions. And then somehow down the road from that, some other Indian people become very loud and outspoken about it. So that kind of thing is a shame. And that does bring us into my question I have here for you. Bear Spirit Mountain is more than a physical place. It's alive with meaning, that I've gotten from your book, which I had not heard of it, of course, from anywhere other than your book. Although my family does have a Bear Mountain in North Georgia. I can't tell you where it's at, okay? I mean, it's on the map, so if you just Google it, you'll find it. But I can tell you that certain people of a certain group of Cherokee, I guess it's okay for me to say that, still meet there for certain discussions, which is kind of important. But anyway, the Bear Mountain in your story and where you're talking about there, it is very meaningful. Um, how has the land itself shaped your understanding of our ancestry?
It's shaping it every day. It The things that I have found there. I've given lectures at archaeological conferences and around these in Philadelphia, around the East Coast, Natural Bridge, Virginia, etc. The things that we're finding there are much older than a lot of the things that you typically find on, quote, an indigenous site.
Right.
So the energy there is also heavier. And I think it's owed to the ancient nature of the energy there. The curtain there between our world and the spiritual world is super thin, which explains why in my first book I wrote about so many occurrences between myself and others with animals, not just the bear, which, by the way, we call him Bruno to this day.
Yeah, yeah.
But with other animals, animal behavior that just doesn't make sense at all, which I know was altered by the ancestors. I often see shadow figures walking in broad daylight around these burial mounds on both sides of the mountain. Just so many things. I've talked to people who live there who have houses on that same mountain, and they give me stories that are just quite amazing of encounters they've had with the spiritual realm. They're not indigenous, and
Right.
and to listen to them, it's just like, yeah, I've seen that, or so it shapes my life so much because it's where who I am today began. I really felt at that time in my life, about 9 years ago, I was happily married and I had a good job at the FBI, but I just didn't feel like I had purpose. I was really, really, and all through my life, Charlie, the ancestors had always been sending me signals
Yeah.
that they had something for me. But two things were happening. I didn't want to know, and secondly, I wasn't ready maturity-wise. And it wasn't until 9 years ago that everything came together, where once I realized the land we bought was a sacred burial ground, very old, I started to embrace our culture and our heritage, and I jumped in with both feet. And Bear Spirit Mountain is where it all began for me. And every day I thank the Creator, I thank the ancestors for bringing me there and allowing me to do what I do, because that one site is now evolved into 37 archaeological sites.
Wow.
Between West Virginia and Canada. It's evolved where I'm now called into civil rights cases as an expert witness on Native
Wonderful.
American and African American burials from the 18th century, because
Sure.
archaeologists aren't taught these things.
That's right.
It's evolved to where I can teach now at university, and so many things that I've been so blessed to do. It all began at Bear Spirit Mountain, and it has just completely turned me into a different person. And I'd be remiss if I left out the fact that none of this could have happened without a loving, supporting wife.
Yeah.
And
I appreciate that you say that, because, so many people forget. One of my favorite quotes from Jim Carrey, and I can't remember which movie it was, but he said, "Behind every great man, there's a great woman grinning." And I love that. I love that. But no, it's absolutely true. And we go through this life hand in hand, and I'm not discrediting anyone else's journeys or experiences, but as something that you and I share, we recognize the significance that we're not just one person, and that's important.
And the fact that I had completely changed my life when I accepted this ancestral awakening, when I accepted the calling to go find these sites and to study and record. We never disturb these sites. I want to make that clear. We don't dig, we don't move rocks, we don't disassemble. Everything is meticulously protected. Um, and
Have they used any underground telemetry?
I use
Any?
it.
Okay, okay. I
I use
noticed in Moundville they have used it a lot, and one of my favorite archaeologists that has a lot more tattoos than I do. He was one of the lead archaeologists there. He told me a long time ago that when we use that telemetry, it tells us essentially where not to dig. Because
yes,
if we see anything underground, he says, that looks like an artifact, we leave that part alone. So the most exciting thing, which is, once again, sharing my intricate knowledge of Moundville, because I love that place. It's such a beautiful place. But um, he told me that they found some holes that were filled in with a different dirt than the dirt around it. And it represented where certain like lodges were erected and what have you. And
yeah,
he said, and this is something you might be interested in knowing, because as you know, in Central America, where they build step pyramids, um, they usually start off with a small one, and
mhm,
then it gets bigger, and another generation or two comes in and they make it bigger, and then eventually a whole nother tribe comes in and they make it bigger. And especially in Teotihuacan, we see a lot of that. But in Moundville, this gentleman told me, which I'm not using his name because I hadn't talked to him in a while, and I don't want to lead one way or the other. But he told me that, amazing to my understanding, that the size of the lodges had grown. They were this size, and while those poles were in the ground, they grew, and
yeah,
and so they made the lodge larger, which is that is a very significant. I mean, the general public may not be able to grasp this. I'm sure you do, but the significance of people being in that place and it getting bigger means that their numbers are growing. They're
yeah,
sustainable. They've invited relationships with other tribes. There's so many things that are so critical to that.
yeah.
And it blew me away. And one other thing too about Teotihuacan, for example, um, because there's so many differences in the archaeological, and I'm not uh, ragging on the INAH, which is their archaeological people, but uh, the general folks that live in the area, whose family have been there for hundreds of years, that is easy to trace. They don't know anything about the telemetry going on,
Right.
and I mean, there's big time uh, equipment being used out there. I mean, they have like little substations set off with their own power sources, and
Yeah.
they'll, yeah, they're not playing. But I ask because, like I say, I've been around that and seen it, and I have appreciation of it. But it does bring to mind one of my questions I have for you, is that sharing sacred knowledge is something of a double-edged sword sometimes. How do you balance that responsibility?
First off, in my books, in my papers I publish, and everything, I never use the actual names of the locations. Everything you will read is a made up name. I do that to protect, number one, the landowners who have graciously given me permission to enter their land and research these sites. And number two, to protect the integrity of all of our burial mounds and ceremonial structures. Because let's face it, most people these days would rather tear it down, get the artifact, and put it on eBay than to
Oh
preserve
yeah,
it. So I always change the names of the sites and never put the actual names. I always say it's somewhere in Appalachia. Well, good luck with that. Um,
right.
but it's very important to me that, and you mentioned I'm kind of, like Bear Spirit Mountain is kind of unknown. I like it that way.
Yeah,
I don't want it to be a Stonehenge. Um, I, there are people that live there. They live their lives daily, and I don't want their
sure.
lives intruded or disturbed by trespassers. I could have never learned that that site was 5 miles long without over a dozen landowners giving me permission to walk their lands and learn what was on their land. So I'm very protective about that, and that's the number one thing that we do is we do not give out the actual locations. There's only one person I will give that to. He's an archaeologist in Massachusetts. He has the only known database of every recorded indigenous site from Canada to Georgia. And because it's important that these sites are included in his database, I will give him the GPS coordinates. But we're very careful to protect these sites and everyone who lives there.
Yeah, yeah. Most people don't know it. When you say protecting and finding it in Appalachia, most people don't know, but one of the hottest tourist sites in the world, Pigeon Forge,
Mm-hmm.
was actually not only sacred native land, not only taken away from Native Americans, but also the settlers that were living there, some of which had married Native Americans and some of
Yes.
which were just settlers getting along with everybody, had their own way about them. That whole area there that is now Pigeon Forge today, and once again, not putting the area down.
No.
I'm progressive in some ways, and what's done is done. Really, is the truth.
Yeah.
Uh, but anyway, that's how things like that happen. Is the government or some organization, is not necessarily always a government organization. Having been in the FBI, you know that.
Yeah.
There's organizations that aren't necessarily government organizations that do things, but anyway, like I said, they took all that land, and just like one of my favorite music groups from my very angry youth, Rage Against the Machine, said they took the
Yes.
land, went there for vacation.
Yes. Yes.
But one thing I've noticed that's kind of a reoccurring theme with you, both from your book and talking to you, and even in this interview, that you've faced critics. You've faced them from within the academic circles, but even though that was originally my question for you, I'd really like to focus on the positive part. You've also got friends and allies in those circles. And I noticed one, and I hope you'll forgive me for mentioning this because I didn't allude to it, and so many times I thought, should I mention this? But your foreword in this book, which is wonderful. Let's see, not the acknowledgement. Your foreword here is written from the chief of the Shawnee tribe, the Eastern Shawnee of Oklahoma. And when I seen that, I felt a lot of good things. I thought, okay, on one hand, there's other of our relatives that are in this fight with us, and I thought this is wonderful. But knowing, even our own shared critics that we have,
Yeah.
for whatever various reasons, it's unfortunate. I took Chinese martial arts, and Mandarin is my, counting English, Mandarin is my third language, not my fourth or fifth, or probably, I think I'm getting up to number 8 now of European and non-native languages. But anyway, Mandarin, I was immersed in that culture for a long time, and I've noticed a lot of things that I learned from their culture. I mean, I've been during Chinese New Year, I've been the head of the lion,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was a lot of fun. But
Yeah.
because of my martial arts skills and at the time I was in the right place, and somebody asked me, would you please do this? We have somebody to do the other lion head, but there's 2 lion heads,
Mhm.
not the dragon, that's a different year, but the 2 lion heads. But anyway, learning what I've learned about Asian culture, oftentimes I see that it echoes throughout all cultures, and a
Mhm.
lot of the ideology about yin and yang and balance, which is really what I'm about, is about balance. You'll find it in little native kids all over the United States, always trying to balance things when they're babies. They're
Yeah.
always trying to find a way to deal with this and this at the same time. And anyway, I find that with you, um, as I hope it does for me, a lot of these things balance themselves out. Our people that are usually our critics are usually undereducated, uh, and I don't mean by like modern educational system standards. I mean they're just they're not they're not keen,
Yeah.
if I can be politically correct, but they're undereducated in that particular respect. But the people who are educated oftentimes are on our sides, which is amazing. And I don't know what the chief of the Eastern Shawnees of Oklahoma's, college level experience. I'll be honest with you, I did read a short bio about her because I Googled her after I seen it in your book.
Mhm.
But I guess it's okay if I say her name is Glenna J. Wallace. She is the
Yes.
Eastern Shawnee Tribe of Oklahoma chief. And what she wrote here was beautiful. And with your permission, I mean, it is your book. I'm gonna write it. I'll read it here.
Mhm.
It says, Bear Spirit Mountain is appropriately named. It is one of the earthly homes of our Native American ancestors, land where they lived, walked, and conducted spiritual ceremonies. There are those who say the past is the past, and in this case, it's not so, she says. Those spirits can still be felt as they continue to speak to us from that high sacred place today, continue to teach us, continue to inspire us, and continue to lead us forward in a reverent and appreciative mode. Daily Bear Spirit Mountain reveals the past to us in the form of previously undiscovered ceremonial sites. At Bear Spirit Mountain, recent discoveries include proof of the observance of summer and winter solstice, sun effigies, serpent wall effigies, and other archaeological finds. Each discovery lifts our spirits, energizes us, and makes us proud of who we are, appreciative of our ancestors, and those who are determined to preserve this heritage. These individuals are Bear Spirit Mountain themselves. Thus far, I have been limited to reading about these places, these discoveries, viewing their images from afar. These dedicated individuals are making it possible for me and others to someday experience this spirit in person. Thanks to them, that day may be soon. Uh, may they continue to be spiritually blessed as they continue today, discovering and preserving the spirits of yesterday. That's a beautiful foreword. And,
Yes.
and to be honest with you, from everything I've read and everything we've talked about, truthfully, even though I've got a lot more questions for you, that really sums it all up. It really does. And I
Yeah.
can see the similarities in her language and what she says and how you have worded things and said things yourself. Which, by the way, I should tell you on another side note, um, there's a lot of my personal spiritual journey, if you would, that I've never shared with anybody.
Mhm.
There's some of it on occasion, and just on a random occasion, I throw out there just to let people experience it. And I'm a very in-depth thinking person, so I'm waiting for the feedback to come from it. And
Yeah.
I watch this ebb and flow of sometimes I'll throw these things out and I'll look for that feedback that comes back. I'll tell you one of those instances. I actually brought it here with me just so I could show you. And I sent another native friend of mine a picture of this stone. I sent him a picture of it, and he's like, that's a nice stone. And I was trying to feel him out. I mean, this is a dear friend, and he would be straight with me on this. But I was trying to feel him out to see if he was going to tell me something sarcastic or if he was
Yeah.
being honest about it. And I think he was being honest, but still confused about its purpose. So I have a piece of what my dad used to call lodestone here.
Yeah.
It's a type of ironite that is found on the surface of the earth, and it has some magnetic properties. I will tell you that in my studies of life on earth here as we have experienced it, I've read lots of books and I've listened to a lot of lectures and talked to a lot of people. There are those, I'm just throwing this out there are those that believe that this stone has a cousin in our moon. Now, NASA believes this, by the way, and this stone um, is what a large chunk of the moon is made out of. Now,
Oh.
taking this a step further, there are those out there, you know, people like Graham Hancock
Yeah.
and you know, Dr. Zitchin, and people that are on a different, not on our talk show today, but maybe
Yeah.
one day we'll find some similarities. But there's people that believe that this stone may have been the remnants from the core of an old planet that used to be in our solar system that bumped into the Earth and created the moon and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I keep it with me everywhere I go. It's one of those things that it is a little magnetic. And like you and I had discussed things about how attraction brings things to us.
Yeah.
I find, regardless of how you interpret it, this stone gives me an opportunity to be a little closer to our ancestors.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
not a pretty stone. It's not a crystal. It's not. When I
Yeah.
was a kid, now I'm going to be honest with you, myself. When I was a kid, I used to be one of those people, and you may not ever think this about me, and I hope you have an inkling of respect for me after I tell you this, but I used to be one of those angry Native youth that hated anything and everybody. I grew up in public school system, which I excelled at, by the way, but that's I won't say DNA, but it's in there. I excelled at public school system. As a matter of fact, my last years of high school, I just kind of messed around and graduated in the top 10% of my class. I wasn't interested in school. I was interested in my chemistry teacher, who was teaching me how to perfect the wine that my mom and dad had been making since I was a child, and he and I discussed that kind of thing. That was what I was interested in. But anyway, I find that I was such an angry person in my youth, and I see a lot of these critics that you and I have today as being just like me. So I'm forgiving of them, which I guess is the right thing to do in some ways. I do study what our ancestors believed about, law and order and things like that, which they were very significant things that our people believed in that today some of it doesn't fly. And like something we used to call blood law, but that kind of thing doesn't fly today. But anyway, I study that, and like I say, this stone I usually keep with me. I don't keep it on my person. I keep it within reach, so that it's not, keeping me distracted all day, but it's keeping me focused where I need to be. So that's important, and that's one of those things, like I say, I've tried to share as much of history and culture as I can. I've been working on new ways to do that as I can, to try to help people share things. So I see a lot of your plight. Now I don't know your plight, but I see a lot of it, and I recognize that you are doing some what I consider to be miraculous things, and I am grateful that the ancestors chose you. Okay, so that's really critical, and I mean that from the deepest of my heart. I noticed in your next book, the one that we only briefly discussed, and like I say, this one is really my focus that I've been reading so far. But as I rest, let my face touch heaven. But I noticed that you focus on legacy and the next generation and the future. How do you see that? What do you hope? What are your hopes for the future, I guess?
I'm encouraged. A lot of the older archaeologists that created the dogma and the negativity that has oppressed our culture for decades now are retiring. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of them. I know a lot of the older 60-plus-year-old archaeologists.
Oh, yeah.
That always made sure the Eurocentric story was more important than the indigenous.
Yeah.
And always made sure to write things in a way that made us look dumb, like knuckle-dragging cavemen.
I know.
So I have several college interns over the last couple of years, young ladies in their mid-20s, future archaeologists. I'm very encouraged because the younger people have a much more open mind about our traditions and our history. They're not tainted as much by the racism that permeated the older archaeologies, to make sure that the whites always looked like they were the smartest. And you mentioned the critics. I've dealt with archaeology. Actually, it's twofold. It's both within the archaeological community, the academic community, and our own community. I've been attacked by both, and but I will say, my mentor Jack Wernicke warned me when I started becoming a field researcher. He said to me one day, he said, "I'm gonna tell you now, son." He said, "A lot of these academic archaeologists are not gonna like you. And the reason why is because, first off, what you're finding, what you're doing, you do as a volunteer. They get paid to do it. And secondly, you don't have that PhD. You're not part of the club.
Right.
And because you're not part of the club, they're going to see you and your findings as a threat.
Yeah.
And they're going to tear you down to try to discredit your legitimacy." And he said, "I'm preparing you." And boy, was he right, Charlie. I've had archaeologists just tear me a new one, just telling me I'm an amateur, and I never claimed to be anything.
Right.
I'm a field researcher.
Sure.
But they ordered me to stop doing what I'm doing.
Like they have the authority.
Yes. Well, in their elite minds, they think they do.
Oh, sure.
And then within our community, I've had folks. Actually, I was scheduled to give a lecture several years ago at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers facility near here. And long story short, a gentleman who runs a Native American museum in New York, who also does work with the Army Corps of Engineers, saw that I was on the list for Native American Heritage Month to give a lecture. So he started researching me, and he quickly learned that I'm not Indian enough for him. So he contacted the archaeologist for the Army Corps of Engineers, who is a close friend of his, and just by word of mouth, that archaeologist contacted the commander of that Army Corps facility, and they had me canceled. And I had a long phone conversation with the gentleman, and the things that he was saying are just simply, I'll say it, a lot of it's racist against our own people. A lot of what he's saying. I said to him, I said, "You do realize you're imparting on me the same racism and discrimination that the white people put on our people prior to this. You're no different. You're no different than the white toxic racist people that you complain about."
That's right.
Anyway, the good news, Charlie, is the ancestors have taught me to be at peace with this, to understand there's always going to be, either in the academic community or within our own community, just accept it and understand that they're the ones with the problem. I answer only to the ancestors. I don't answer to an archaeologist. I don't get a salary. You can't deduct my pay. So in my mind, as long as the ancestors are happy with the work that I'm doing on their behalf, reminding the world how amazing they were, that they lived, they loved, they died.
Mm-hmm.
And they left a lasting. I ask people all the time. Some of these sites I have are over 12, 13,000 years old, and yet we can see tangible evidence of what they built. What can we build today that will be here in 12,000 years?
Right.
Nothing.
Nothing.
So if that doesn't say how amazing they are, nothing will.
That's right.
But I'm at peace with the criticism. I understand it's always going to be there. I simply developed this "I don't care" attitude.
Right.
If an academic doesn't like what I'm doing, or someone in our own community doesn't like what I'm doing, I simply just say, "Okay, whatever. I don't care. I don't answer to you."
That's right.
And that's given me peace in my heart.
That's good. I'll be honest with you. Um, there are a lot of gifts that I accredit to the ancestors, and the spirits that bring things to us. This was just a small one. It's not very beautiful. It's not really fancy. And to most, it's not even quite that magnetic. It's only slightly magnetic, from that point of view. But it is such a significance in my life. And it does what I have asked it to do. And it continues on. But I find that the ancestors have brought, me my whole life, really.
Yeah.
And when you live that way, and you realize that the world that you're living in, the physical walking around and working and doing your job, our computers, our cell phones, our cars, everything, that's the fake world. We're living in the other world, and there's so many people that have been doomed to only experiencing that fake world that they say misery loves company. It took me the first 25 years of my life to understand what that meant. It means that those people, like the crabs in the pot, try to grab you and suck you down, and they want to be miserable, but they want you to be miserable with them. And it's in my case, and I feel like in your case, and in so many people who have any kind of spiritual awakening, I feel like it's in their case too. We'll share you, and I would like to acknowledge that I don't disregard any religions or peoples or their ideas. I've always been like, that's you and this is me, and that's fine. And there have been times in my life while I haven't, and I can hear the buttons clicking when I say this, but I haven't been a Christian my whole life. I've studied Christianity in greater detail than any member of a church that I've ever seen, which I've been in several churches. I've never been a Christian, and I'm not against Christians, but I've tried to witness. I've had friends that were Christians, and it seemed like they were questioning what they were doing, and I tried to witness to them using Christian terminology to put them back where they were at, because it was working for them,
Right.
And I've got dearest friends who are ministers of almost every faith, and what have you. But I want to share with you a poem that I memorized when I was a kid. I loved it. And you had hit on something that kind of made sense to me, and I wanted to share this with you about Native people and ancestry. And I know back in Dr. Tankersley, his interview, we talked about the 7 generations and what have you, which is a very, typically kind of a Plains Indian type idea, but we all share the same idea. We just may not have gotten it over here, or may not have kept it, or what have you. But this poem, it's not one that rhymes. It's more of a story, in my opinion, but I love it because it really shaped my life. A long time ago, there was an old man. He was an Indian, and he was also a Christian, and he was at the same time a very good person. He loved everybody and was very kind to everybody. And eventually the day came that he died, and he went first to the Christian hereafter, and they wouldn't take him in because he was Indian. And then he went to the Indian hereafter, and they wouldn't take him in because he was Christian. And then he went to hell, and they wouldn't take him in because he was such a good person. So he came back to life. He came back to life and started teaching his kids and his grandkids the old sacred dances and sacred ways.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That's very special. Yeah,
it is. It shaped my life, and really has. It keeps me grounded, because when I was a kid, like I said, when I was young, and being darker skinned than a lot of people, but not being a federally recognized tribal member, and knowing where my ancestry lies and where they're from and all this, I hate to use the word stories, because stories can sometimes be fake, which is where a lot of those critics play on these words. The English language, of all the European languages that I speak, or any world languages, including our own peoples, The English language is it's a trade language. It's based in Latin and
Right.
partly in Norwegian,
Yeah.
but the Latin part of it is one of the most, uh, it's what we call a dirty language in linguistics.
Yeah.
It is so corrupt, and it has so many different ways to describe something so that you can sell somebody something.
Yeah.
Whether it's selling them a good idea or a bad idea, it's been so imbued with all these words. You know, my mom's father was from Wisconsin.
Mhm.
His mother was born at an ancient mound site called Trempolo,
Yeah.
and the Trempolo is an Indian mound in Wisconsin, and it's an amazing place. So it's where my great grandmother was born, and my grandpa's people's language has always been very important to me. In the original Sioux language, there were about 300 words. Regardless of which dialect and how you pronounce things, there were about 300 words. Today, there's about 600 words. I was looking at Cherokee the other day because my son's been studying real hardcore, and I haven't listened to people speak Cherokee since we left Oklahoma. Um, Once I've got 3 or 4 friends that speak it, and once in a while I hear them. But when he was studying it, I was wondering how many words were in the historical Cherokee language, which I had guessed around 2,000 or 3,000, which I was close. And today there's about 7,000. And I get occasional emails for updates on the Cherokee language because new words are actually added every year. In Oklahoma, there's a group of people that put these words together and come up with new ones. And some of them are critical and some of them are ridiculous, but trying to keep up with the English language and describe everything as we do in this crazy foreign language, you know, it's hard to come across with some ideas. So I respect what they're doing greatly, but at the same time, it's another one of those double-edged swords.
It is.
But anyway, you know, I'm amazed that you know, we can still hear the ancestors. Because when I was little, I thought I would have to speak the language to hear them. And fortunately, you know, unfortunately, I learned English first, but fortunately, that's not how they speak to any of us, which is great. And like I said, through my angry youth, and really, you know, if those people that were the critics that we were talking about off camera, if those people had give me an application to join their cause back in those days, I probably would have. But I hope to God that you know, I would have awoken as I did eventually from, you know, that pain and suffering that I was actually going through to this great gift that I feel like. And I don't want to, you know, I have my own, you know, some people don't walk under ladders, and some people are afraid of Friday the 13th, and some people are afraid of black cats. None of those frighten me, but the one thing that always frightens me is saying how much I appreciate something, or how much I like something, or I'm grateful. Those words oftentimes nip me in the rear. So I'm not going to say how grateful I am for any of that, and I'm not trying to allude to it because no mortal human could understand what I feel. But I do hope that it continues, and that I'm fortunate enough to continue both our friendship as well as meeting other people like yourself. I'm truly and deeply honored, you know, by what you do, the fact that you're willing to share it with people. Like I was beginning to tell you, in my youth, I was taught not to share a lot of my my spirituality, and when I started reading this book, I read it with an open mind in the hopes that it would lead me in a good direction, and it did. And I am not only, to say that I'm impressed is a very short-sighted way of saying it. I do greatly. I am honored to be around you and in your presence. I truly am. So, you know, thank you so very much. Keep on doing what you're doing. You know, the significance of this place is critical among Native people today. I know that we don't know it, but I can sense, because, you know, when I bought my property, I had similar guidances, I will say, okay? I mean, you know, short story, there's parts of my property that a cell phone won't pick up. And
Yeah.
I'm so, but don't feel like you're alone. When we get off camera, I'll talk to you a little bit about those dark spirits that you've seen, those dark figures, I should say, because in English, once again, a very misleading language. When we say dark spirits, some people think you're talking about
Evil.
angry, evil, whatever. Has nothing to do with what you and I have experienced in our life.
Nothing.
Nada,
Yeah.
nada,
Exactly.
not even in the same ballpark.
Yeah.
But anyway, and certainly, I am educated enough that I could actually discuss that same idealism within certain religious realms as well. I will tell you something I meant to mention back a couple of clicks was that talking about good archaeologists and the ones
Mhm.
who are angry and what have you. I have had that experience in my life. One of
Yeah.
them, whose name was Judy, and I won't say the rest of her name because that's enough, but I will at least build an image of this person, was in my life and in my parents' life a lot because my parents were not as deeply rooted as you are caretakers of ancient sites, but in some ways very much so.
Mhm.
And Judy, who became the head of a certain archaeological, uh, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say group. I think that's probably vague enough. Um, she really wanted my parents' property, and she could have took it from them anytime she wanted to. Because I grew up on the side of a Creek Indian mound,
Yeah.
and we had things going on there, very respectful things that we didn't mess with, you know.
Yeah.
And Judy really was interested in that property. Fortunately, I'm not, I'm not alluding to her demise or her passing to the next realm, but fortunately, she is at the age of those archaeologic, people that you mentioned that are kind of no longer in the scene.
Yeah.
But most importantly, when my dad passed away, my mom wanted to move back to his homeland, and she did. And she
Yeah.
sold that old property that I grew up on to a Buddhist monastery, which I have great feelings about. Other than giving it to the family who we would have probably fought over it for no stupid good reason, giving it to a Buddhist monastery was the next best thing, and I'm so glad of that. But like I say, we've experienced those same kind of things. There's a lot of stuff I would have never mentioned around that particular archaeologist, and it's fortunate that they have been changing, and I see
Yes.
that as a big plus.
Yeah.
I see that being a very important thing. I've got one last question for you, and then you can share whatever you'd like to if there's anything else we haven't covered. And certainly, as I mentioned to you before, I know there's going to be a time that you and I are going to need to have this conversation again because you have so much going on. We couldn't have covered it in an hour, 2 hours, 6 hours. And really, there's so much that you have going on that I can only recommend people to start off with these two books and then move on to the next one that I hear is in the works. But and you're welcome to mention and give a plug for that, please do. Uh, but but I do know that we'll be talking again in the very near future, and I hope that in some way, shape, or form we'll be able to do it. Maybe in person would be nice, and
Oh,
show
that
the
would be.
people some of the sites.
Yeah.
But I'm
That
not
would
I'm
be.
not inviting myself to those sites. Sometimes I'll tell you some ancient sites, even their own people aren't welcome at, and it's okay. But
Yeah.
if they tell you that you need to bring me there, that's on you. That's okay. But one last question I was mentioning I would like to ask. You have honored this site that predates colonization by thousands of years without waiting for the government to validate it. Uh, what message, and this is beyond, I'd like to use the title of this question because it really focuses on what this podcast is about. Recognition beyond federal status. Okay. What message do you have for Indigenous people from state recognized tribes or unrecognized tribes or people who aren't a member of a tribe who are working to preserve their heritage without federal backing? What kind of message do you have for them?
If you have a true calling, and that calling come from the ancestors, and it has turned your life upside down, like this guy, in a very positive way. If you know in your heart you have a calling None of those agencies, those tribes, the government matters. You work for the ancestors. Don't forget that. It doesn't matter what a state tribe says. It doesn't matter what the federal government acknowledges or doesn't acknowledge. A quick example, in my early days, I was determined to get all of my sites, at that time about a dozen, about 6-7 years ago. I needed to get them all state registered through the State Historical Preservation Office. So I would call them up in our state capitol, had multiple conversations, literally begging them to come out, take a look. If you disagree with me, fine, but at least look. I couldn't get anybody in my state to come out. One archaeologist at that State Historical Preservation Office said to me, "You're a 6-hour drive away. If I'm in the area, I'll give you a call." That's the amount of disrespect that we get from our government officials. The absolute non-caring and disinterested and arrogance, just downright arrogance. Now, I've been successful in getting other states' archaeologists to my sites.
Right.
They're blown away.
Yeah.
They're the ones that you see on my books that endorse my research.
Yes, yes.
And yet, my own state government archaeologist can't be bothered. And Charlie, that ate at me for at least a year or two. And then finally, the ancestors reminded me they don't matter.
Yeah.
The work you're doing to preserve and protect, and again, that's what my company, Bear Spirit Mountain Incorporated, our nonprofit company, was set up to do, is to, when the ancestors bring us to these sites and we confirm they are indigenous and we study and record and photograph, the most important step is to protect. And currently, through our Bear Spirit Mountain company, we have protected over 1,700 acres in West Virginia alone.
Wow.
Of our indigenous land, our burial grounds, our ceremonial sites, our village sites, our concentric circles, so many things that each one is very special to me, our company and our team. And by the way, it's not just me. I have a team of about 10 volunteers who put their heart and soul into climbing mountains, walking miles, trudging through rivers, studying fish weirs, everything. If it weren't for them, there would be no Bear Spirit Mountain. And I'm so grateful to them. But the primary thing that people need to hear is remember who you're doing this for. It's not a government agency. It's not a tribe. It's the ancestors who called you. Therefore, it's the ancestors that you need to do the work for and shut out all the other noise.
Yeah, and I'll tell you from my own experience, because, oh my gosh, I have experienced some anger in my life. I can tell you from my own experience, there are things that will consume you and make you want to do things that are fleshy, that that are we are made out of both skin and blood, and like Sagan said, we are all star stuff. It's so hard, it's so hard to navigate the journey between the two, and regardless, I could bring up how our brainwave patterns are like this, and how our heart works and what have you, and show you the symbolism and the metaphors there. But regardless, the fact of the matter is, we are all caught in beneath these two worlds, and some people tend to go more towards the fleshy side, and some of us try to go more towards the spiritual side. And I have been enveloped by the fleshy side in my life in such a way that I would have fought tooth and nail to get out of there, until that one instant when the Spirit told me, it's time to stop fighting that. This isn't a battle that's worth your efforts. And I think I've told myself my whole life that if I had to have been in battle, that I would have been the end all to that battle, to that conquest. But I've decided that there are battles that are worth my efforts and ones that aren't. But I come from a long line of farmers from Virginia. Their last names were all Farmer. But I also, something I mentioned, I think, on one of the last episodes is I've also got one of the first savages in this country that ever stepped foot on this land is in my family genealogy. His last name was Savage.
Yes.
And he historically married an Indian woman, but that was a great granddad with the last name of Savage. But the farmers are the ones that I always remember when I go outside. I've got a garden. I'm always growing that. And I know that my plants are appreciative of me growing them and taking care of them. And like my seeds that I had showed you earlier, I keep seeds of all kinds of stuff. I've always done that. I belong to native seed keeping coalitions and what have you. So there's a positive way to experience and take care of this stuff. And once again, I can't thank you enough, Maasaw. It's been great. Also, there will be some links in the description of this video for anything that you'd like to share, so where they can get your book, any information about your organization, anything that can help. I will give you a word of warning about those people, and I'm not telling you specifically so much as I am the listener. There are things that many of us don't share because regardless of the kind of people that scream or the kind of people that kind of they libel you academically or in front of the government or what have you, there are those that are infiltrators, as you and I discussed off camera, and those are some of the worst kinds because they're lying to us, themselves, and everybody else. So, but in any case, I am so thankful. You've been listening to Left Behind Natives. I'm your host, Charlie Maasaw. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, take care of each other and take care of the land. Thank you so very much.